Zorro was created in 1919 by a writer named Johnston McCulley, and people have called him a hack writer. He wrote for these pulp magazines. They got paid a penny a word for these, and they cranked out. And what they tried to do was create this incredible world of adventure for readers. And in those days, there wasn't all this television kinds of things that we get to take up people's time today. So people went for those kinds of adventure things in the pulps. So you could read police adventure pulps and you could read Western adventure pulps. And Johnston McCulley really hit on a winner when he created the Zorro character. The word Zorro is Spanish for fox. So a fox is wily and clever, and that was the metaphor for who this character was. Because although he was a fantastic swordsman and he used the whip fantastically and stunt rider and athletic, he also was much more clever about defeating his enemies and humiliating them rather than defeating them with brute strength.
The effect of the book when it came out, first as a magazine article in 1919, was immediate. It was immediate because it was picked up by a gentleman by the name of Douglas Fairbanks.
The darlings of the silent era in those days were Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks Sr. They got married and took a cruise, a honeymoon cruise, which was typical in those days, across the Atlantic. You need to take lots of things to read. So while he was on that honeymoon voyage, he actually got the ball rolling in terms of production so that when they came back from that, they actually started filming. The original story that Johnston McCulley wrote that introduced Zorro to the world was called The Curse of Capistrano, which has a nice poetic flow to it. It didn't really capture the essence of what Fairbanks wanted, and so he renamed that story The Mark of Zorro, and that's come down in history as the title.
The Mask of Zorro, which is, to my mind, the definitive Zorro movie of all time. That project actually began in my office in mid-1990 when I turned to my twin sister, a very talented screenwriter, Nancy Larson, and asked her if she would collaborate with me on the creation of a new Zorro screenplay. She spent several months working on a first draft. When it was finished, I took it to Hollywood. There were lots of different offers from various studios. It was very well received. But frankly, I got one that was more enticing than ever from TriStar. And it wasn't the money that was enticing. It was the fact that this particular offer came attached with Steven Spielberg and Amblin. We began work on the film in early development on the film in 1991. So through many incarnations and a lot of history, we finally released the film in 1998.
Steven Spielberg was intimately involved with the conceptualization of the movie and the development of the script. And it was more challenging material than you might expect because there have been many versions of Zorro. We all felt it was important to try to find a way to make the movie fresh and modern.
Tone is crucial in a movie like this. So when we had the script and we started looking around for a director for the movie, we looked at recent movie history and saw that there was one man who had recently successfully reinvented a classic movie archetype for a modern audience. The archetype was James Bond, the movie was GoldenEye, and the director was Martin Campbell.
When I agreed to do the movie, the first thing I did was go back and look at all the old movies. What attracted me to the project was, first and foremost, the story. I thought for once here was a story that has humor, it has adventure, it has romance, it has a great operatic quality, it has two heroes instead of one. The women's part was very strong. It was sword fighting. It was period. Antonio Banderas is a consummate actor. He's a very experienced actor. Because he looks young and he looks so handsome, and one tends to think that, you know, his success, if you will, is fairly recent. He's actually done 52 films and was at the Spanish National Theatre for many years. He's an actor who brims over with ideas, has a terrific Latin passion for his work, passion for everything. He has a great ear for music. He's a terrific dancer. He just has an ability to do all of those things.
You have to think that at the time that I was watching Zorro on TV in Spain, we had only one channel, the national channel, and it was almost like an obligatory on Saturdays in the afternoon just to watch the adventures of Zorro. So yes, and I remember playing Zorro once in a while in the terrace of my house with my brother and just hitting our heads with a stick, something like that. I mean, he's probably the first hero, action hero, to go to the big screen. And the fact that also this hero was Spanish and never was played by a Spanish actor, it just gave me a lot of good feeling just to be part of a movie like that. And especially because I was going to be the first Spanish actor to play the character after 36 or 40 productions all around the world.
Anthony Hopkins, I think, everybody knows is obviously a fine actor. And in fact, I think a lot of people would rate him as one of the best actors in the world, and I think that's true. We needed somebody to give a weight and a nobility to the movie. That was the point. Now, there are very few actors of that age, and we could think of them. There's Connery, there's Hopkins, Alain Delon maybe, but that was it. There's virtually nobody else. And Hopkins was doing The Edge at the time, and he turned the film down. He simply said, I have this bad back, and I physically can't do Zorro. I'd like to, but I can't do it. And during the filming of The Edge, they had to shut down production one day. He went and had a laser operation on his back. I think it was like 2 hours, just, And he came out in 10 years of excruciating agony, disappeared, never to return. And he rang up and said, I'll do the part.
This is more in my nature because I've never grown up. Those stiff-necked guys I played, like Remains of the Day, wonderful movies, and I know, and I'm very grateful to have done them. But, that's fine, but enough's enough. I've done that now, and in my advancing autumn years, I may as well have some fun.
My relationship with Anthony Hopkins, I think, is what creates, the comedy, essentially. He's a very, very mature, skillful man trying to teach this pitiful clown, thief, so that provokes comedy, but little by little also there is tenderness in their relationship. There is a kind of relationship between father and son.
Good, that's good. It's the old theme, the old master and the young kid. And it's like a good old partnership of fondness and friendship, and the experience I have to teach this young boy.
Catherine Zeta-Jones was a suggestion of Stephen's. What happened was that he'd seen her in Titanic, the TV series, and I had vaguely heard of her. I must say, I wasn't in England when there was a series she did called Darling Buds of May, which made a reputation. I think a rather sexy series that was a big, big hit in England.
Stephen is doing some reshoots of The Lost World at Universal, so I go up to Universal in my little rented car, shout very loudly to the guard, I'm here to see Mr. Spielberg. I hope everyone hears that. And so I go to meet him, and he was really, really charming. He told me about the project, about Zorro, that he's producing it. And he was very honest with me. He said, Martin Campbell is directing, and ultimately it is his choice, but I really want to recommend you to Martin. So literally within a week, I had a meeting here at the Sony lot with Martin Campbell. And then I was invited to screen test in Mexico, which was nerve-wracking but fun. And within a few weeks, I had the part, and I was down in Mexico starting the training for the sword fighting and the dancing and the horse riding and the Spanish accents and things. So it was a bit of a whirlwind.
We didn't want an out-and-out villain. What we wanted was a tragically misguided man who, having been thrown out of Mexico and sent back to Spain, when he comes back, like in the beach scene, this is not a man conning the people. This is a man who actually believes he can deliver to the people.
What he wants is power, but not just for the sake of it. He wants to be remembered. He wants a statue put up to him. But he's not interested in the gold. He wants to go down in history as the man who built a country.
I wanted this kind of guy who was a very straight-backed military man, young man, with this warped sense of honor, that he has, this military sense of honor. And I think Matthew does it wonderfully well.
We're modeling him kind of on a young Custer. I mean, that's the idea. Very heroic, very dashing, very crazy. And in this case, very evil.
The picture spans from 1820 to 1840. Every frame of the film was filmed in location on Mexico. There's a studio in Mexico City called Churubusco, and it was all designed and constructed by Mexican people.
We had more than 600 or 700 people working for our film, construction crew. There is a great amount of crew in Mexico. Artisans are the greatest. My crew was excellent. I only took the construction coordinator, the art director, and my scenic painters from United States. Everybody else was Mexican. We built everything on the shop, props, furniture. We had 60 sets to do. Some of them were within the haciendas, but there were 60 setups.
Cecilia Montiel, the production designer, who is Peruvian but has lived in Mexico for many, many years and now lives in Venice, California. knew Mexico quite well, and she found these places. And the haciendas we used, the two major haciendas, one of them was 400 years old, one of them was 500 years old. I mean, really, really, really extraordinary places. And the deal that we made was, for the right to use them, we'd restore them to their original state. Graciela Maison was the costume designer. She is a Mexican gal who now lives in Hollywood, and she went back home to do this picture. She designed and created everything there in Mexico. Everything was immaculate. I mean, the detailing was 1840 to the degree that she went to museums, so everything was authentic.
In this movie, I dress around 2,000 extras, and well, of course, I rent a few of the outfits, but most of them I made them. I made dresses and suits for the party. I made the Chinaco-style outfits that I couldn't find in any of the rental houses.
Graciela Maison, her attention to detail is amazing. Like some of the pieces of jewelry that I wear in the movie, she actually made by hand. She's a wonderful sculptress.
Zorro's costume, I felt it should be traditional. I felt we shouldn't alter it. I thought it should be all black, but with highlights.
The Zorro costume that I made for Anthony Hopkins had more the Spanish influence. And for the costume I made for Antonio Banderas, it's more like Mexican influence.
We looked at, a lot of movies about what kind of sword fighting we wanted on the picture. We wanted it to be really realistic and really inventive. Bob Anderson is our sword master, and Bob did Princess Bride, and I mean, he's taught guys back to Errol Flynn. I mean, he's such an amazing character.
It's choreographed like a dance. Every move that the actors make is choreographed, and each actor must know exactly what the other one is doing. You cannot ad-lib, and if one actor loses it, then I would immediately say cut, because it becomes very dangerous.
They were like athletes working out for the big match or the big game, And we would get awakened every morning by the sound of swords going, blades hitting each other. And it was Hopkins and Banderas and Catherine and Bob Anderson and his guys working with him. He had swords that were really heavy, clanking noises. No one could sleep because these guys, at all hours, especially in the morning, they did it early in the morning.
You're never going to find a skilled actor like Antonio who can use a sword like he does. He has all the hallmarks of the Doug Fairbanks of the past, but he has a modern approach to it. And he has this fantastic physical ability. He just learns a sequence and he fights it. He puts everything he's got into it. He trained very hard. I started him off in Spain 3 or 4 months ago, and he trained under the fencing masters there for 2 months. Then he came to me, and we took it from there, and he picked it up so quickly.
Bob is a genius. He's a guy who has been training the best sword fighters in the world. He has been into Olympic Games too. I mean, and believe me, he's a guy who's 70 years old, and you cannot touch him with the sword. He's very skillful.
Not every actor is so well coordinated. I think that's it. If you've got good coordination, fast reflexes, and something, the flair, I think you might call it, is something in the mind and your being that makes you enjoy it, then you've got a swordsman.
We were using real swords. They were lighter when we were sword fighting, and they were a little bit heavier and more beautiful when you have a close-up or something like that.
The blades are aluminum rather than steel, and we take the point off the end because we don't want anybody to get hurt with these swords. The idea is to give the impression that it's dangerous without actually being dangerous.
Got it. My job was to make sure that I kept the camera wide enough so it did all their hard work justice.
2, 1. And Martin would come into the rehearsal and say, right, and this is where everything falls off. And I'm going, Martin, what do you mean everything falls off? I mean, you go, oh, be so quick, darling, no one will see anything. I said, Martin, people have freeze frame on their videos and the machinery at home. At the very end, they just kind of wired with this kind of invisible wires, and then when Martin shot it in action, it just all came off. But I'm really glad that I have long hair in the movie.
Phil May, who's been my DP on all my movies, bar one, the look of the film had to be romantic, it had to be lush, it had to give a whole sense of period, and I think he's done it absolutely wonderfully. I personally rewrite all the action. And I do this simply so everybody's in the loop. You know, filming's expensive, and I like to put in the script what's going to happen on screen. I then go and I have a storyboard artist, and I stand with him, and I literally get him to draw every shot, every angle that I want. I never do it with dialogue, I simply do it with action. And it always pays off simply because it means you can work much faster. Everybody's in the loop about what's happening. Two of the most important people on the crew are Corky Randall, who is the horse wrangler, if you will, the animal wrangler, and Glenn Randall. They're brothers. Animal wrangling is very interesting, you know, and training horses is very difficult. There was something like, I think, 5 tornadoes, and each tornado had one particular ability. It was to rear up, it was to kick, come through a door, and that took a long time for Corky to, over months of training, long before we started the movie. One of the things he taught me was patience. You know, animals, you have to be very patient with them. You have to wait your moment with them, and you know, you may do 20 takes.
The horse that we had in the movie had a relationship with me, Antonio Banderas, kind of what you saw in the movie.
The idea of the trick rider, none of that was ever in the script. That's something that Glenn came up with, and I talked to him about. I wanted more than what was in the script. We had to do something with the horses that would really be sensational, and that's what he came up with. When I designed the film, I only had the whip in initially for Zorro's escape in the opening sequence, and he uses it in the end, and he carries it. I didn't think I was going to use the whip that much. And what happened was that Hopkins' stunt double happened to be he's Australian, a whip expert, one of the best Australian whip experts. And so Hopkins took it upon himself to train himself with the whip. And he was forever, you know, while he was off screen, while we were filming, I'd hear these cracks off screen. And I'd say to an assistant, tell whoever that is to shut up. And it was Hopkins, of course, wielding the whip. And he became very skillful with it. And then he said to me, you know, I'm doing all this work with the whip. Is there a way in which we can use it? You know, I'd love. And there's a scene in the cave in the middle of the film, which basically I choreographed entirely around Hopkins' whip because we wanted a scene that involved the whip. And of course, it works beautifully.
Zorro's Cave was a set. We built it in Studios Churubusco in Mexico City with foam. We went to a riverbed, many riverbeds, and I chose the shape of the rocks that I would like to have. We sprayed silicone on some of these rocks, and we made molds, and then we came to the studio and sprayed it with foam. Very, very light. We hang it from the beams of the studio with rope, and then in between the cracks, you just fill out, and that was the way that the cave was built. The color also is a little, in the film, certain parts of what we see is a little bit blue, and that was intentionally to have a little bit of blue within the rock. The set of the mine started with the description of the script. We needed many different levels for the action to be performed. We decided to do 5 levels. It was 90 feet high by 180 feet long.
That was like 1 hour outside of Mexico City in the middle of a suburb. People were living all around it. I mean, the camera had to be framed so you couldn't see telephone poles and all kinds of things in the distance.
Every morning when we arrived to the set, we had the storyboard of the shots that were planned to do that day. And we received information and storyboards previous to even start the movie, you know, about what was the conception of the scene. We saw also a model of the place in the way it was built, you know.
We built a miniature set to realize the project before we started building. It was an expensive set, and we wanted to be sure it was going to work for everybody.
Glistening on the sword, I remember standing there, we were shooting it, and Antonio called me over and said, "What about this?" So I stood there and he showed me he pulls the sword out and he holds it up and then he slowly turns it and there's a reflection of the sun. There's this glint that goes right along the sword.
You know, you have to be, you have to be very careful that people, feel that you are straight into the eyes of your opponent at the time, but with the sword looking for the lens. So it's kind of tricky. It's kind of tricky, but we got it. Like the third time we did it, boom, he said, yeah, I got it. Oh, it was cool. We didn't need any special effect, laser or anything, computer animation. No, it's real.
The explosion in the mine was interesting, to say the least. The first time we blew it up, I think we had 7 cameras on it, and the mine is so huge, or the set was so huge, that a lot of charges had been laid. And I remember this huge ball of flame enveloping the whole set, smoke, bangs, everything else. And as the smoke cleared, it hadn't moved a nail or a beam of wood out of the side of the mountain. There it stood, loud and clear. The second time we did it, the 7 cameras were rolling, and only half the mine blew away because someone had gone in and broken, accidentally, one of the wires to the second half of it. Well, as that happened, it was a good thing, because the force of that explosion, you can see the cameras juddering as it, even the distant cameras, the shock wave is unbelievable. So had the whole thing gone off, I'm sure half the cameras would have disappeared. So we then did the third time, which completely annihilated the mine. And I cut all 3 of those explosions together. So in a way, I got 3 goes at it. I must say, at one point when we shot the new ending here, they wanted to have Hopkins alive. So in other words, that he didn't die after all. But so in other words, I was going to do an alternate scene with him living for the sequel, obviously. And it was very funny because I remember thinking, well, if I shot the end scene in a day, the one you see now, and I thought, well, I'll run in, edit it, put it together, and I'll show it to them, and hopefully this other idea will go away. And it did, so that worked well.
3, 2, 1, action!
From a personal point of view, in reflecting back on the movie, it was physically the toughest movie I've ever done, being in Mexico, largely being a location shoot, but physically the toughest I've ever done, a much tougher film than Bond in that respect. And I suppose it's the most rewarding film I've ever done, in that despite it being a comic book hero, I had action that I'd never done before. So the challenge was terrific. It went way beyond just doing an action adventure film.